Hi, I'm Richard Terry LaPointe, and I'm being interviewed by Catherine Robison, my daughter, and we'll be talking about family history. This is February 18th, 2018.
Thanks, Dad. Last time we stopped off, you told us where your first home was.
Mm-hmm.
What in what other homes have you lived? What other places have you lived? You just sort of give us a little history
Sure.
of your childhood homes.
Sure. We lived in San Francisco. That's probably the first home I can remember, and it was right by the farmers market in San Francisco. It was Navy housing, and I lived there while my father was serving in the Navy. My brothers and I attended Paul Revere Elementary School in San Francisco. It was on a very high, steep hill. And we lived there until we also lived over in Pleasanton in federal housing.
Is Pleasanton in
Pleasanton,
San
California.
Francisco, or is it in a
California.
different city?
No, it's in California.
Okay.
And it was a nice place for young, rambunctious boys because we ran all over the fields there, played in the creeks, it was lots of fun for us, some little boys. As time went by, we moved to Japan, and we lived in Quonset Hut 13 in Yokosuka, Japan. My father, following the end of World War II, my father was posted in Yokosuka, Japan, where he was in charge of the gas station on the Navy base. He was also responsible for repairs. The garage is where they did auto repairs. Upon our return to the United States, in about 1952, we moved on to naval housing contiguous to Alameda Naval Station before it was closed down. Once my father retired from the Navy, the first home we had bought since the home we had owned in San Leandro was in West Pittsburgh, California, 392 Marina Road. And it was a brand new home. We watched it built, a very modest place. My folks paid about $3,000 for it.
What year did you move in?
That was 1953.
Okay, so was it in a community that was sort of one of these post-war, sort of all the houses looked very similar,
Yes.
and in these little suburbs?
It was a home of modest means and construction. They were flat tops. They also had just simple, plain cement floors. And it was across the street from the elementary school we were to attend at a later point.
Describe the house inside. What was it like? And where did you all stay?
There, it was 3 bedrooms, kitchen. It had a small living room. It also had a heater attached to the wall. And as a little guy, I liked to put popcorn on the edges of it, and it would pop.
It must have gotten hot. So did you and Uncle Mike share a room? And
I shared a room with Uncle Mike initially, and as time passed by, my grandfather, George Cunningham, came down from Oregon and took a where we parked our car under a, can't think of the name of it now.
I mean, it's like I can't think of the name either. An open garage of some sort.
Yeah, and my grandfather.
The carport.
It was a carport. Yes,
Yeah.
Here we are struggling for the word. But my grandfather came down and remodeled it and made it into a bedroom for me.
Oh, wow.
And so I had a bedroom by myself, and there was a shed attached to this bedroom, and that's where our wash machine and stuff were located, and we washed clothes. And when you have a bedroom when we had a bedroom in my house that was attached to the wash machine, I was the place where all the clean clothes had been washed or
Got
tossed.
piled on your bed?
Yeah, and it was probably about 3 or 4 feet.
So did you fold the clothes?
Fold the clothes. I also ironed my clothes, and I got to be pretty good starting about 3rd grade.
Wow. And you were there until you graduated from high school, right?
Yes, we were there from 1953 when we moved in to 1960 when we moved out to Martinez, California. And I continued going to school at Pacifica High School, but we no longer lived in that house. My parents had separated. My mother remarried a rather wealthy man, and he built a really lovely home for my mother in Martinez on the top of one of its many hills.
Was that the home that
Yeah,
I knew Grandma living in?
Alphinian. No, you probably were familiar with the home on Brookside Drive.
Okay.
That was contiguous to a creek behind the house.
Okay. All right. Also going back a little bit, try to think of your very earliest memories.
Probably my earliest memory was living in the house in San Leandro, California. And I can remember vividly my father coming home from the war at about 1945. And my father came home in it was probably a 1948, 49 Chevrolet, a 4-door, painted navy gray. And I can remember my father quite vividly because he was in his Class A dress uniforms that had all his medals and stripes, for service in the number of years he served in the Navy.
And he'd served for quite a long time because he was in
10
years or so before the war.
Yeah, he joined the Navy in Texas, Houston, Texas, in 1942.
In 32, right?
1932.
Yeah. So you remember your dad
coming home
from war. I mean, that's really little. If it was 1945, you were 3 years old?
I actually was 4 years old.
Okay.
I was 4 years old when I saw my dad.
How do you remember feeling? Do you remember what you
really
thought?
Happy. Because of the war, my brothers and I really didn't know my father well because he was gone most of the time. Stationed once the war started, as I mentioned in an earlier piece, my mother drove cross country with my grandmother to San Leandro, California, and from Key West. And we stayed there until we were posted to Yokosuka, Japan, as I mentioned earlier.
Okay. Tell me any stories or memories that you have with your brothers growing up. What it was like for the 4 of you boys.
Well, I can remember quite well. In Japan, I can remember my brother Michael being the baby of the family. Really had lots of fun playing with construction vehicles like dump trucks and different things that push the earth around. And he stayed there. He played there just all the time in a great big sandbox that we had, and myself and my brother Bob and my brother Stefan really enjoyed playing on the base because it was a relatively small base, lots of things to attract the attention of little guys, and I can remember we had a burn that separated the ships from housing during the war, and it's obvious that Yokosuka, being the imperial headquarters of the Japanese Navy, had all kinds of devices to, fight American bombers, bombing them all the time, including the burns, as I mentioned. And they were tall. They were at least 600 feet high in an angle. And on the top were anti-aircraft guns that were still there. And my brothers and I enjoyed playing with them, running them up and down like this and sideways. And that was fun. The guns were made inoperable by the occupying troops. They cut the barrels off, so there was no chance of them being used improperly.
Must have been like a kids' playground paradise that you guys could play on all this real equipment.
And we would climb up, the top of these burns. They were at angles, so they weren't unsafe, by slipping or falling. We also had caves that I can remember in American history, one of the American history magazines, that was written up, and they were these massive underground caves that had big screens in them where they would track American airplanes flying in, and so they could meet them, both with fighter planes as well as anti-aircraft guns. And we loved playing in those caves. They were great big things. And I remember more recently, in about 1980, I went to Yokosuka again, and the Navy, the caves were all sealed. And the magazine I read, an American history magazine, had written an article about it that was what we saw, these massive screens where the Japanese would track the American airships coming in to bomb them. Also in the base, we went bowling, we had a swimming pool, we had a skating rink, we played, we had, dinghies where we learned to sail. We had a golf course where we would go play golf. None of us were any good, but we had fun doing it, nevertheless. We also played baseball. We had games with. I was a Cub Scout, and my brothers were Boy Scouts, and they played baseball games against the Japanese Boy Scouts, and it was a lot of fun. We also played on the football field that was there, and on the 4th of July, we would all go out and lay on the grass and at the football field and watch the fireworks be shut off. And that was always fun.
You and your brothers were really involved in sports and other activities. What are some memories you have of being involved in team sports? Or, you've mentioned the Scouts. What else did you and your brothers participate in?
Well, we enjoyed, once we entered high school, to play in a much more organized way. Before I actually started doing that in high school, though, I played Babe Ruth baseball. I was a second baseman. I played baseball with the American Legion baseball team we had. We didn't have a lot of activities in living in Shore Acres, where we lived on Marina Road. There were times when we had teams and uniforms and stuff, but these things didn't seem to sustain themselves really well. Even though I was too young to play American Legion, sometimes they didn't have enough players, and they would ask me to play second base, and I did. And I can remember we played some teams from Lafayette, California, and just would get creamed. They were just very, very good. But on one occasion, they had us. Their pitcher was like about 6'8", and he pitched a fireball of a fastball really, really hard. No one had gotten on base by the end of the game, and I was up at bat, and I took a walk. While I didn't hit anything, I was the only one that day to get a hit. Pardon me, or go on base, get on base, and it was kind of amusing. But I enjoyed when we had the opportunity. I even belonged briefly to where we lived. There was a nursery that had established itself in where we lived, and I played. I joined the 4-H, and we did things with plants and flowers and things like that.
And then when you got to high school, you and your brothers were on team sports,
right? Yeah. When I joined these teams, I'm sure, at the result of my brothers, Bob, who was the oldest, and Stefan, who was next oldest. They were really talented, and they would go up to the gym, which was the only place where we could play in the summertime. And we played basketball from sunup to sundown. And my brother Bob was really good. He was the captain of the varsity baseball team that my first year in high school.
The baseball or basketball?
Pardon me, basketball. And I really enjoyed it. I went up, and my brother Stefan was also a good basketball player. He was a lot bigger than my brother. Bob was about 5'7", I think.
Oh.
And
was he like a point guard or something?
He was a shooting point guard, and really was quite good. He actually went on and played at BYU his freshman year. In those days, when I was young, freshmen couldn't play on the varsity. They had to wait till their sophomore year.
In high school?
In college. In college. Yeah. My brother Stefan was about 6'2", 6'3", and he played basketball really well too. And he was basically the hammer. He was really tough. He went on to become a paratrooper, and took that toughness to the Army. As time passed by, my sophomore year, my freshman year, my brother's senior year, they played varsity. My brother Stefan played varsity, and I played B basketball and C basketball. That would be junior varsity and freshman basketball. And I really enjoyed it. I also participating in track. I was a high jumper, not especially good. I think my highest jump was 5 foot, which using the scissors is hard to do, but I had fun. I also played basketball 2 seasons. During the fall and during the winter. And that was fun. My brother Bob played baseball. He was a second baseman, really one of the best in the county. I can remember one time he was involved in 5 double plays in one game, which is pretty good.
He was just sort of a natural athlete, wasn't he?
He was.
Really gifted.
And a natural leader. He was on the football team. He was the quarterback, and did really well. He did well. He was the captain of the team, and he was the captain of the basketball team, and captain of the baseball team. My brother Stefan played varsity basketball his sophomore year. He played, and he was just a terrific cross-country runner. He was on, they have these all-county, all-region, basketball or track teams, and he was all San Francisco area track cross-country runner.
Wow. And your younger brother Mike did all this stuff too? Did he do basketball?
Later on, my youngest brother Michael played basketball. We moved our family when my mother remarried in 1960. We moved to Martinez, California, to our new home. And my brother Michael played on the Alhambra High School team. So he was just a terrific halfback, defensive back, and basketball player, cross-country runner. And in fact, his running cross-country and track led to his not having to go to Vietnam. He was attached to an Army team when he was drafted, an athletic team, and the military sponsored lots of these athletic teams. And if you were really good, all you did is run. You didn't ever go to war. He was lucky, and didn't have to. Though he was drafted.
So Mike was drafted.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about why Bob, Stephen, and you didn't go to Vietnam.
Well, my brother Bob went to BYU after graduating from high school. I believe it had to be 1957, and after that year, he came back. He became engaged and married Nora Green, a dear friend of ours from high school.
Mm-hmm.
And he knew her from high school also. But once you were married and had a child, you didn't get drafted. Later on, some of these things changed, but in the beginning, we weren't in the Vietnam War. Uncle Bob didn't have to worry about that. My brother Stephen, though, he was drafted, and he decided he wanted to go through the paratrooper training, and he did that. And he was set to go to the Dominican Republic at one point when there was fighting that went on there between different communist and non-communist factions. My brother Michael.
So did he go to the Dominican Republic?
He was on. They were in a barracks waiting.
And then the timing also was that he didn't go to Vietnam.
He didn't go to Vietnam.
But he was in the military during the time period.
Yeah.
In the Army?
In the Army. Mm-hmm.
Paratrooper.
Paratrooper.
Okay.
And Uncle Mike went to when he graduated from high school, went to the University of California, Santa Barbara, which was an absolute heaven place to go to school. You were literally right on the beautiful California coast beaches. And he messed around in school and lost his protection for being a student. If you were a student, you wouldn't be drafted if you were keeping your grades up. He wasn't, and he was drafted, and he lucked out. Didn't have to go to Vietnam, but he was trained. He went through officer candidate school, did extremely well there. He was graduated second. Well, he was going to graduate second in his class, and the day before he graduated, he withdrew his interest in being an officer because unbeknownst to me, my father had gone out to the Army base where he was going training, and my father talked him out of taking the commission. Needless to say, the Army was really, really unhappy for him pulling out at such a late date, and they threatened to send him to Vietnam. As it turned out, he was assigned on a temporary basis to run for the Army, And from then on, everyone loved him because he was so good. And he was sent to Germany rather than Vietnam. And he ran for the army against German runners and did very, very well.
And you were busy in college
Well,
during those years,
before,
right?
well, while the war was raging initially, I was serving as a missionary. And when I returned, they weren't drafting at that point. And a year after my return from Brazil as a Mormon missionary, I married Mom. And in about 12 or 13 months later, we had our Denise. We had a baby. And the draft board gave me a rating that said that I'd never have to go. So, and that was because I was married and had family obligations, and I didn't even have to request it. All I did is send in. When your status changed, you're required to send something in notifying the board of that, and in doing so, they put me in a category that didn't require it anymore. The rules changed as the war went on, though. When I went to Cal, they had they set a rule then. They gave you 4 years or 8 semesters to finish your degree. It didn't make any difference when you started. If you submitted your paperwork in the second year, even though, they counted that against you. And I had lots of friends go to Vietnam at that point. A lot of kids who fooled around were drafted. They didn't, and if they could determine that you were delaying your draft by dragging your feet and graduating, they changed the rules and said, doesn't make any difference. You have X amount of time to do this, and if you don't, we're still going to draft you.
Wow.
So it got pretty rough, and at a later point, they had a lottery where they just pulled numbers out of the hat, and they would, you had no idea what number you'd get. I mean, you may have got, let's say, 5,000. And they would, in the beginning, the draft was picking up people that had high numbers, and the people who had low numbers didn't. But that changed ultimately too. So.
Did you know people who went to Vietnam?
Yeah, I had some kids in my class from high school.
From Pacifica?
Yeah, only one of my friends from Pacifica I ran into him at Cal, who was majoring in mathematics, and we knew one another quite well. And he was drafted.
Did anybody you know die in the war?
No, I don't recall anyone dying. And I had lots of friends that went in. The soccer team I played in college. In 65, I had 4 of my soccer friends they'd seen these John Wayne movies. They all drafted.
They drafted or they joined?
They joined.
Yeah.
And they became Green Berets, special forces. One went into he became a medic and went on when he finished his. There's a picture in our mom and our wedding, and you'll see my friend in his special forces army uniform, where he was a medic. Went on to become a physician after he left the army. But most of my friends, there were 4 that I was close to. 2 they had serious mental problems after the war. I mean, big time.
Like PTSD.
PTSD.
Did they become addicts or something?
they did become addicts. They became, they wouldn't, what were some of the things they did? Just they were alcoholic. They let their hair grow. I mean, they let their hair grow for years, and had big, long beards, long hair, and some of them were messed up mentally, and they loved to argue and fight, and.
Why do you think that happened after Vietnam and not after World War II?
Well, I think one of the issues was in World War II we didn't have this flood of drugs, and Vietnam was wall-to-wall drugs. Kids took drugs because they didn't like the war.
To cope.
Well, and it was something that permitted them to escape. But they.
Do you think the decisive victory with World War II? I mean, your dad, when the war ended, they won the war. I mean, it was a real clear, defined victory. Do you think the lack of a defined victory?
Well, military people feel they were successful. It was the American newspapers, political figures who attacked them, actually attacked the war, and they came home to no support. And these guys got so heavily involved in drugs that even once they came home, they continued their drug. And I had some really close friends. One of my friends who played on the soccer team with me was an All-American fullback. He was probably the worst example. And we had some of one of our goalie. What was funny about it is these guys all joined. They didn't get drafted, and I think there was a lot of reasons why they drew. I'm not sure too many were patriotic reasons, though it could have been. It also included things in rebelling against their parents and rebelling against, American culture of the time.
And all this time you were busy going to school, taking care of a young family, figuring out how to. I mean, Mom didn't work through all those years. No. You not only went to school, but you also were providing.
Well, I worked the whole time I was in school.
The whole time.
I had a job the entire time I was in college, from my freshman year until I graduated with a PhD.
Wow. Well, I'm going to switch a little bit, just for the last question here. Sort of looking at, we'll come back each week and kind of keep doing chronology and go through some of that stuff. But I want to ask, what are your earliest memories of feeling proud of yourself, of an accomplishment, whether in school, in sports, in scouting?
I thought of this kind of a question for quite a bit, and probably the most interesting moment took place when I was in the 6th grade, and the most important, volunteer activity you could do would have the teacher select you as the blackboard monitor. And I can remember vividly setting things up so the teacher would identify me as that student to be in charge of erasing the blackboards, knocking the chalk out of the erasers. And it was very conscious about what I was doing, why I was doing, and what were the implications of it. I went on to become, I remember when I started in the 7th grade, I was elected. This was a funny story. I was elected to the student government in our middle school, and I can remember that I was in we had merits and demerits as part of the disciplinary system for our 7th and 8th grade school. And I can remember I was in an art class making stuff out of clay. And one of my friends from across the room threw a piece of clay and hit me. And I just threw it right back. And June Crosgrove stepped right in the way. And I hit her in her white sweater. And I got 5 demerits for that. And Dennis McCloskey was selected to take my place when I was kicked off the student council. And anyway, when I went to high school, I was president of my class several times. I was on the student council for 9th through 12th grade. I was vice president of the high school. And in the end of my junior year, I was selected to be president of the California Association of Student Councils for our region, for all of the region.
Wow.
And I was selected to go, as president of the region, I was selected to go to the state meeting where we elected the president for California. And in that situation, I ran for president, and it was a tie.
Wow.
and my friend was president, and he would have selected me to be the new president, but my advisor didn't want to do it. And so she declined, which caused me to lose the seat. And the president was interesting. The president was kind of a nerdy guy who was selected. When he was selected, went back to Williamsburg, Virginia, for the national meeting. And in the national meeting, they had elections and stuff too. But that was kind of a painful moment in a way. But then again, I enjoyed being regional president. So,
where do you think you got that ambition that made you want to be the board washer or racer job? What did you call it?
I was the monitor,
the
blackboard monitor.
Where did you get that sort of ambition to do that kind of thing, and then to do, go into 7th grade and run for office? I mean, did you have your mom and dad saying, "Hey, you go do this"? Or
no, my parents not only didn't encourage me, they didn't discourage me, but they weren't even aware of it. So, and it was no fault of mine. I mean, because my mother wasn't there most of the time, and my father was studying for his bachelor's degree to become a teacher in that same period, and he lived over in San Francisco while we lived in West Pittsburgh, California. And I just had this drive and interest in serving, being president of most of what I did, and I enjoyed it. While a lot of kids were just doing nothing in Shore Acres, California, I was in San Diego or Fresno or San Francisco in these meetings. I mean, I was president not only of this student government, but junior statesman that studied about foreign affairs, just a variety of different kinds of student organizations. And when I was taking trains from San Francisco down to San Diego to attend one of our statewide meetings that were held, but I enjoyed it. That clearly was one of the reasons. And I didn't especially enjoy just sitting around doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Also,
most of my friends did nothing.
you were reading newspapers
Yeah.
and history books and things way beyond,
Yeah,
way before other
yeah,
people.
and yeah, Mom is right. I was very much involved in reading. I loved history. I loved biographies. I mean, Washington, Jefferson, John Paul Jones. I mean, these were people who just electrified my interest.
You had a much bigger horizon than your peers. You could see and had so many more experiences than them. I mean, how many of them would you say went on to get higher education?
Our graduating class had 150 students. 15 of us went to college.
Wow.
So
you maybe there was need for leadership. Maybe you saw need for leadership in your group and sort of rose up to that. And
well, I set a whole series of goals that I wanted to do, that I wanted to accomplish in my lifetime. I mean, I can just consciously think I wanted to be elected to a city council. I wanted a PhD.
when you were young,
When I was young,
you made
yeah,
these decisions.
yeah. I mean, I was very clear in my thinking and what I wanted to do and why I wanted to do it. And that's kind of the famous bucket, list. I did this, I did that. Well, I didn't quite do it like that, but when I went to Cal, for example, I would have loved to have been on the the student council. I would love to have been the president of the university. But I was in an environment that was so liberal. There was no way in the world I would ever get selected to student government there.
Right, you were going to school in the 60s
Yeah,
when
yeah.
it was.
But there were things I did. I couldn't get elected to the student council. I was selected to serve on the men's judiciary committee. There was a 5-member board that we decided when students violated rules that the university gave us the authority to determine what sanctions or penalties they would be levied against them. Toss them out of school, suspend them. And there were 4 Jewish members and myself, and I was referred to as the diversity guy. They were wonderful young men I served with, absolutely brilliant kids that went on to Harvard and Yale law schools, all 4 of them. And I went to Cal. I mean, that's where I wanted to go. But in fact, I have a yearbook for Cal downstairs with my picture in it with them.
It'd be fun to pull those out for next week.
Yeah, one of the things that was interesting about because of that, we were invited to be the honor guard, number 5 of us, when Chief Justice Earl Warren came and spoke at the university. We were taken backstage and plopped down in front of him, and Thurgood Marshall actually introduced us.
Wow.
And it was kind of interesting because we were kind of standing around, and Thurgood Marshall walked up to us and said, have you spoken to the chief yet? Or the Chief Justice yet? And we said, no, we haven't. And he turns to Earl Warren and said, hey, Chief, come here. And we just about died laughing. Thurgood Marshall asked one of my colleagues there. He said, "Now, what are you going to do when you graduate?" He says, "Well, I want to go into the rabbinate." And Thurgood Marshall kind of blinks. He says, "What's the rabbinate?" To become a rabbi. But we had those kinds of experiences because while I wasn't on the student council, I served in a nice position. It actually turned out to be a wonderful experience because as I assumed greater leadership responsibilities in educational leadership,
Mm-hmm.
I had those experiences I had with the Judicial Council paid off. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I had learned valuable lessons on how you met out penalties. You don't hang everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are some kids that are well worth saving, and then there's a handful who aren't worth saving a bit. So,
Well, I have a little theory that I've always considered. I don't know if I've ever shared it with you about where that comes from with you, that you know, sort of drive to be engaged, involved, and not ever write yourself your own rejection letter. And I've always wondered if that comes a little bit from your dad's upbringing, where your dad was raised by his aunt and her husband, his aunt and uncle, after the age of 7, raised by the Genters. And I talked to your dad about this in 2000, and he told me about really that he was this, Cinderella of the house. I mean, he had to, everybody got their own birthday party and all the neat stuff, and then, nothing for him, and he had to work to earn his, space in the home, and to earn his food, and to earn his lodging, and he didn't get the opportunity to do things, and he'd see, his cousins that he was being raised with get to do everything. And I've wondered if your dad going through that, then raising his own kids, just did he ever tell you guys, or give you the impression you should just go do everything, get involved in everything, and don't take no for an answer?
well, you saw in the pictures of my father and mother when they got married, and up in the upper right-hand corner is a small box where my father belonged to 2 service organizations, I believe, at his high school, at Thomas Jefferson High School in Houston, Texas. But when I went down to UCLA, as my first degree I worked on was a master's degree, and I got involved in student activities, and I got involved in my interest was federal student aid. I don't think, I was the only student that I can ever remember having any interest in federal student aid. And so when time came to make financial aid awards, the dean of financial aids had really became fond of me and made sure I got money. For example, Title VI foreign language fellowship. It was the only one in the federal programs that not only gave me a stipend, paid for all my fees, books, and so forth, but it also gave me one for each one of my dependents. So mom got money, our three children got money. There was no other fellowship like that. But because I served on these committees, and I was the student representative on these committees made up of entirely of deans, university deans, I earned a way to the table. And that turned out to be the case when I went into my doctoral program. I think I've told you the story of me when I had, I wanted to be a candidate for the Fulbright program, and for the first 2 times I applied, I wasn't selected, but I wasn't even eligible. But I wanted to know how to do it right when I was eligible, which was the 3rd time. And that was the biggest honor I ever received academically. There were out of 50,000 students, 100,000 members of the campus, I was the only one who got a Fulbright fellowship. And I knew when I got that Fulbright fellowship, I was guaranteed to pass my doctoral exams.
Right.
Nobody was going to flunk me when
Right.
I would cost the university prestige.
Right. Oh, it's just pretty remarkable with the background that you come from, just sort of the, you know, you didn't have a lot of wealth or
Okay.
status or anything like that as a young person, but I've always found it interesting that you had interest in these kind of things from just a really young age, and I think a lot of it's just
Well, we'll talk about Concord,
Yeah.
the city council and those things.
oh yeah, we'll get to that.
At a later time.
Yep, we'll have lots and lots of time to talk about all these things, but I've had a lot of fun with that, so thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll call it a night.